Hello, I'm Jim Miller. I'm here with, well, me. Terrence and Reggie are on assignment tonight. The FlipSide starts right now. Good evening and welcome to the show. I'm here tonight with Barry Jackson. Barry is the election director for the Board of Elections for Washington County, Maryland. Barry, it's election season, right?
It's never not election season.
I was going to say the same thing. You're absolutely right, but it's gearing up.
Yes.
There's a lot of stuff coming up, a lot of dates that we need to talk about. But let's start out with what the Board of Elections in Washington County does, how it interfaces with the state and others. Talk to me about the roles and responsibilities of the local Board of Elections.
So the Washington County Board of Elections, as one of 24 jurisdictions in the state, is responsible for administering elections and keeping voter registration rolls in the county. And what's nice about the state of Maryland, this isn't true in all states, but in the state of Maryland, we're kind of a top-down model. So the State Board of Elections creates regulations based on election laws in the state of Maryland, and then they disseminate them down to the local boards. And so we kind of answer to the State Board of Elections as a local board. It's kind of a unique relationship because the staff of the board are state employees, state of Maryland employees, and yet almost our entire budget is paid for by the county. And so we're not really a county government organization. We're actually a state government organization, but we support Washington County. And the Washington County Commissioners approve our budget every year. So it's a very unique kind of a relationship.
Now, is that budget approval, is that the same in all the jurisdictions in Maryland, or is that because we are the type of county we are? We're not a home rule.
It is the same in
Okay.
almost every jurisdiction. There are 4 counties that actually are county-owned departments. And so the rest, the other 20 are state.
So talk about your staff that does all of the work associated. I can imagine there's a lot of work.
Yes. So there's been a little bit of turnover in the past few months. Our longtime director, Kay Rebusi, after 31 years at the Board of Elections, retired on July 1st. And then also Tammy Durr, who had been in our office for 17 years. She was our election judge coordinator. She retired. So that's a lot of knowledge that went out the door. And so I replaced Kay as the director. Teresa Morningstar is now our deputy, so she replaced me as the deputy. We have Corey Green, who is now our office supervisor, who took over Teresa's old job when she got the deputy. So we all kind of moved up. Mm-hmm. And then we've hired a couple of new folks. And so and we have a full-time staff of 6 people. And that's a lot of work for 6 people to do, to take care of 100,000 voters, you know. Wow. So we also have, when it gets closer to election time, we'll bring in some folks to help us in the office, you know, part-time people who really work full-time during that time to kind of augment, you know, the work that's being done. Yeah, looking forward to it. It's a new, you know, almost everybody's in a new position, you know, in our office. So we're all kind of learning our way through it. And yeah.
Talk to me about some of the specific things that you do as part of your duties. And not just you, but I'm talking about the Board of Elections in general.
So voter registration, that is a 365-day-a-year responsibility for us. So we constantly register voters, constantly take voters off for if they move or whatever it might be, if they pass away, those kind of things. So we're always keeping our voter registration database up to date. And there are ways for us to make sure that they're as accurate as possible. And we do that on a regular basis. When we get into really election season, which is what we're really starting to do now, we start to do things like recruit our election judges. Again, I mentioned we have 6 people on our staff, so there's no way 6 people are going to run an election, right? So we need local citizens to help out with that. And so we actually hire about 600 people.
Wow.
600 election judges that go out throughout the county on election day and work in the polling places. If I could just put a little plug in for our election judges, the General Assembly this year passed a law that created a floor that election judges can be paid. And that's a $250 floor, which is a good bit more than we were paying our election judges in Washington County. So all of our election judges get a raise. If you're a returning election judge, you get an additional $100 in addition to the pay that you get paid. And our training pay has been bumped up from $25 to $50 for attending training. So, we always felt like our election judges didn't really get paid. They work 16 hours, on election day. And, when we looked at what they were getting paid, it was less than minimum wage, Wow. So now it's a lot more, I think, a lot more fair for what they're getting paid. And we'll be contacting our former election judges who worked in 2022 first to make sure that they're coming back, and then we'll augment from there, if we need to recruit new election judges.
And do you normally recruit every election cycle? I know you had almost a crisis last time, or
Yes.
maybe it was in 2020 as a result of COVID. And do you normally find yourself in recruiting mode for election judges?
We do, because again, the first thing we do is we contact our folks who worked in the previous election and, give them the first shot at coming back. Most do, but, some don't. And so then we go from there. We try to fill in the gaps and recruit from there. I don't know a time where we've ever had more election judges than we needed. So it's always a case where we're to the last minute, trying to fill in holes. And 2020, I think we ended up okay because of the fact that we didn't have all of our polling places. We just had those 11 vote centers, so we didn't need as many election judges because of that. But in 2022, we were definitely short, in some polling places. I think that the fact that the General Assembly, and they were aware, and this wasn't just us, it was all around the state. So I think that's one of the reasons why the General Assembly, passed that law, to raise the salary, hoping that that would help with recruiting.
And again, that budget for those positions, even though it's dictated by the state, is paid by the county.
Correct.
Is that true?
And it's what the county likes to refer to as unfunded mandates.
I understand that. Can you talk to us about, for election judges, and what skill set are you looking for in those individuals?
It's interesting. To me, the most important aspect, I think, is a willingness to serve. If somebody has that, we can train the rest. It's not terribly difficult, the work that needs to be done. It can be complex, a lot of rules and regulations, and usually those are the things that we hire our chief judges for. So the chief judges are our managers in the polling place. They certainly have a lot of responsibility. So we do try to look for someone who has had management experience, or at least a professional background. And then, as far as that goes, any of the other jobs, checking in voters, that's something we can train them how to do. Helping voters at the voting booth or helping them cast their ballot at the scanning unit, those are things that they can learn. Anybody can really do that. It's really, to me, if we have someone who's willing to help in their community, that goes a long way.
How important in Washington County is having people that can speak in other languages, or how important is that piece?
I think it's becoming more important. We have one particular precinct where we have had folks come to vote where English was their second language, and so they really needed help. And we were fortunate to have a chief judge who could speak Spanish, and he was able to help them. We do have a service that the state board provides. It's actually a virtual service where you can get on the phone with someone who actually, this service will provide many different languages, depending on who, the person is that's voting. So we take part in that, and we have it ready. We've never had to actually use it so far, but we do have that as an option.
So if someone shows up and wants to, their principal language is Romanian, you may be able to help them.
That's correct.
And that is available at all of the polling places?
Yes, yes, through phone contact. So they would.
No, I understand.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, virtual, or virtual of sorts. Interesting. So talk to me about you. How long have you been involved in election administration, and what inspired you to apply for and accept this new role?
I remember it was 2008 in the primary election. I voted at my polling place, and I noticed that my polling place was Fair Play, and it was at the I can't remember the name of the place now, but it was like the Roritan building or something there. And I noticed as I was voting that the election workers were, they seemed very knowledgeable and very pleasant, willing to help and, smile on their face. And I thought, boy, I thought that was interesting. And then I also noticed that they had a big potluck, a big buffet in the back of the room, that everybody, all the workers brought their own food and they all shared together. And,
Nice.
So yeah. And I thought, boy, I'd like to get involved in that, And so after the primary election, I called the election board and got on the phone with Kay Rabusi. She answered the phone and said, sure, we could use you, come on down. And so I got trained and I became an election judge, and that was in 2008. And so I did that for many years, helped out in early voting as a chief judge. And Kay mentioned to me that she knew that I was interested in full-time employment, so she mentioned that the deputy position was available, so I applied for it. So I started in 2016 as the deputy and was in that position until this year when I became the director.
Excellent. Talk to me about what the process looks like of organizing a local election. Walk me through the timeline, walk me through the significant milestones, if you will.
Yeah, the state board does a good job. They provide us with an election calendar that actually we post on our website too, by the way. So we use that calendar ourselves.
And that website, by the way, is?
It is washco-mdelections.org.
Okay.
Right. And yeah, you can go on there on the homepage, and there's the election calendar on there. And it's very helpful, not just for us, but also for candidates, because it shows all the campaign finance deadlines, reporting deadlines. And it also has all of the election dates on there, so voters can find out when is the primary election coming up, those kind of things. But yeah, we our deadlines are on there, so we follow that a lot. And so we have a process we go through. Like I said, right now we're really focusing on our election judges. We just recently selected our early voting sites. We have to get our polling places approved for election day. So those things are what we're working on now. Once we get that taken care of after the first of the year, we're going to start preparing to train our election judges. That's a pretty lengthy process. We usually start that in March and go through April.
How long is that training for an election judge?
The class itself?
Yeah.
It can be 3 to 4 hours.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well, that's not...
It's not like an all-day thing.
No.
Our technical judges, so we try to have a technical judge at each polling place, if there's any problems with the voting equipment. That's pretty comprehensive, to show them troubleshooting and things like that. That's usually our longest class, so they can really kick the tires. But we'll start that in March, go through April. We usually have about 50 classes that we have to conduct, and that's morning, afternoon, and evening. So weekends, so it's just trying to make it available for our election judges because, some can't make certain times.
Right.
So, we try to give them a variety. And after we've done that, then we start testing our equipment. And what we have to do is we have to test every single piece of electronic voting equipment, the poll books, the ballot marking devices, the scanning units, and making sure that they work properly. And the way we do that is we actually run a mock election through each one of those systems and make sure it's capturing the information properly.
You just know what the outcome's supposed to be, right?
Right. We do have an expected outcome, at least in that case we do. And so we test them, and as long as they're working properly, we turn them off, we lock them up, and we actually seal them up. And then we get them ready to be sent out to the polling places or early voting. And those seals, we record the numbers on the seals, and so then when they get to the polling place, our chief judges then match those numbers up to say, yes, nobody's touched this equipment since you all tested it and turned it off, right? And so that's how we know when we send the equipment out, it's working, and it'll support the election. So we do that right after or actually in conjunction with training our election judges. So those things are going on, and at that point, what's also happening is, as you know, vote by mail has become more prevalent in the past few elections. We will have sent out in January applications for everybody in the county if they want to vote by mail. So they can fill it out and send it back in, or they don't have to. If they want to, I know you said you're an election day guy, going to the polling place, so you can ignore it and throw it out, right? But for those who send it back, we will send them a vote by mail, a ballot in the mail. And there's actually a couple ways they can get it. So we can mail them a paper ballot in the mail, or they can get a ballot emailed to them, which they would have to mark and then print off. They can't cast it electronically.
Right.
They still have to print it off, but they could mark it and then print it off and then send it back to us. And so while we're training our election judges, vote by mail ballots are coming in. So we're processing those vote by mail ballots, and then we're getting ready for canvassing. And we're actually another law was passed by the General Assembly that allows us to start counting the vote by mail ballots before Election Day, which is very helpful because, especially with as many, we had over 20,000 vote by mail ballots in 2020.
Out of how many normal voters in Washington
I think we had 68,000 people.
So a
that
third
voted. Yeah,
almost.
so a third of them
are vote by mail. Wow.
And again, that was 2020, which is a little unusual.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, but anyway, the point is, no matter what, there's going to be way more vote by mail ballots than there ever used to be, and so it's helpful for us to be able to count some ahead of time and get ready. Now, we don't release any results or anything until election night,
No.
but we still get that opportunity to count them. And so we're doing that before early voting starts. And then, of course, early voting starts, and that's 8 straight days of 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. that the polls are open. So just like Election Day, but 8 straight days before Election Day. So that's
And you have the election judges at those?
That's correct.
Wow.
So we have to recruit our election judges, not only recruit election judges for all of our polling places, but once we've found those folks, then amongst them, we say, who wants to work early voting? And a lot do, because early voting is a nice dress rehearsal, for when they go to their polling place on Election Day. Gets them a little live experience,
Okay.
And so they'll work early voting. And then once early voting is over, we then, we used poll books and voting equipment and scanning units and all of that. So what we have to do then is, the state board helps us with this, is we have to then reset our database for the polling places. Because if somebody voted at early voting, we don't want them showing up on Election Day and voting, right? So now we have to update the databases to show who voted at early voting. So that happens the weekend. So early voting ends on Thursday, and then Election Day is the following Tuesday. So we spend that weekend updating our poll books and, with the new information of who voted at early voting. And then those go out to the polling
Do
places.
you also update for mail-in ballots?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and those those actually happen automatically as we process mail-in ballots through our database. That happens automatically. That voter gets credit for having sent in a mail-in ballot.
Okay.
Yeah, and so all that stuff gets updated so that if one of those shows up on Election Day, then they would not get a regular ballot.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned that did we miss anything?
Well,
in the
I was just going to
process? Go
mention
ahead.
the next thing, of course, is Election Day, which is, that's like our Christmas, and so, that's the big day. We got 600 people out all over the county, and our board members come and they help. They drive out to the polling
Christmas
places.
or Black Friday?
yeah, who knows?
And not the good side of Black Friday, right?
So, so that's a big day. Election Day is a big day, and
And then we got to count.
yeah, and then after that, then we finish up whatever mail-in ballots we hadn't counted yet, and we count our provisional ballots. So all those happen after the election. And then 10 days after Election Day is when we're supposed to certify the election. Say, okay, all the counting's over, here's the election results.
After the election, I'm sure you learn something with each election.
Mm-hmm.
What does the postmortem look like? How does that happen?
Yeah, we do. In fact, we do that a number of ways. So our board That's the first thing that probably that happens is our board gets together with the staff and we talk about kind of like you said, a postmortem, and what went well, what didn't. And then, of course, the state board then has a virtual, like a conference call with all of the jurisdictions, and then we do the same thing. What worked, what didn't, and a lot of times, they'll implement some changes based on that. We also we kind of got away from it a little bit, but I want to go back into having our chief judges come back in and meet with us after Election Day to say, what did you see at the polling place? Because there are representatives, on Election Day. We're stuck in the office, trying to support them. But we like to hear from them, how did things go? What went well, what didn't, So I want to try to get them back in after each election.
You mentioned earlier the website. Mm-hmm. What information can our voters, our potential voters, our citizens find on your election website?
Anything election related at all is on our website.
So if I wanted to see a list of candidates that had declared for a particular office, I could see that there?
Yep, you can see that. You can register to vote on our website. You can check past election results. You can learn about the board. We have a section called About Us, and in the About Us section it talks about each of the board members, has a little bio if you want to learn about them. It also has all of our past minutes, so if you wanted to learn what did the board talk about in their last meeting, so we have that in there. We even have the recordings. They can listen to the recordings. We have the board packets. The packets that we hand to the board members is actually on the website, so they can see that. And then on the left side of our homepage, there's just all kinds of helpful links. We have a link to the county commissioner's website. We have a link to municipal sites. So if anybody wants to know when Smithsburg's election coming up, you can find that out. So just anything election related is on there. And you can even file for candidacy if you wanted to be a candidate. We have a section on there for filing. So anything you can think of is on there.
Interesting. So we're about a third of the way through our time. I think this is a good time to take a break. So hopefully you'll stay with us. And I hope you'll stay with us too. We'll be back with Barry Jackson after these messages. Welcome back. Once again, we're here with Barry Jackson, Director of Elections. Am I getting that title right?
Election Director.
Election Director, Washington County Board of Elections. You mentioned your board. Talk to me about your board.
What do you want to know?
Well, what is their function? We've talked about the staff and their function.
Yes. Well, the board is ultimately responsible for all that goes on in Washington County as far as elections. So the staff, myself and my other 6 folks, work for the board. They come once a month. They have a meeting once a month, second Tuesday at 3 o'clock, and it's open to the public. And they, we bring the agenda to them. They discuss whatever the, hot topics are at the time. But we support them, throughout the month. And so they certainly, direct us in tasks that we need to do, and we carry those out for them. When we get to election time, that's when they really kind of earn their pay, because on election day, they will go out. They have a certain number of polling places that they need to visit, fill out a form, make sure everything's working okay, see if they need anything. They'll bring some supplies with them. And so they typically have about 10 polling places. Each one has about 10 that they need to visit. And so, they spend most of the day out, and then they'll come back and get something to eat, go back out again, So they're available all day,
How many are on your board?
We have 5 members.
You have 5 members, and what is their term of service?
It's a 4-year term, and the way it works is they are appointed, it's always after the gubernatorial election. So the incoming governor will appoint the new boards for a 4-year term. And so with this year in 2023, with Governor Moore coming on, they actually kind of cleaned house. And we have 4 new board members out of the 5.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the other thing is, the way it works is it's a bipartisan board. You have to be nominated by a member of your central committee. So you're either going to be a Republican or a Democrat if you're on the board. And they are nominated to the governor's appointments committee. And in this case, now that we have a Democratic governor in the mansion, we have 3 Democratic members of the board and then 2 Republican members of the board. For the past 8 years prior, with Governor Hogan in, we had 3 Republican members and 2 Democratic members.
Now, is there a minimum number of Republicans versus Democrats?
Well, like I say, it's always, since it's a 5-member board, just the majority is always the sitting
Reflective
governors.
of the sitting governor's
Right.
party.
So it's
Okay.
always 3 and 2.
Okay, so it's always 3 and 2, and 3 being the whatever the governor is. Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So, obviously, a lot of deadlines. Deadlines for candidates, deadlines for voters. Can you speak to some of those that are
Yeah.
throughout the cycle?
The first one that's coming up is our candidate filing deadline. That's on February 9th. It's been open since February of 2023, believe it or not, and we've had 2 people, at least for local offices, that have come to our office and file. One of them actually withdrew, so we have 1 person who's currently a candidate. The rest of the races that are on the ballot, they would usually file at the state board. Or, if it's president, for instance, I think they file with the FEC. So judge positions, Congress, Senate, they all file at the State Board of Elections in Annapolis.
Okay, so who would the people that would be filing with you or county commissioners?
Right, but in this election...
Well, not this election, but
right.
I'm just saying over.
Yeah, any of the local offices, county commissioner, sheriff. Treasurer,
Right.
All of those. But for this election, really all we have that's local is City of Hagerstown, mayor and council, and then Board of Ed. And
we have Board of Ed every time. It's just
we do.
3 one time, 4 the
and
next.
4 the other.
Yeah,
And
okay.
this is the year that we have 4.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, so hopefully it'll be quite a few people that file.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but the board, going back to the board, they are also responsible for the canvasses that we run. So what we call canvasses is when we count our mail-in ballots and our provisional ballots. It's a whole process. So we and the staff, we prepare the ballots. We let them know, the board know, how many ballots we're going to count on any particular day. We'll get them out, and we have election judges that help us. We'll inspect them and get them ready for counting. And the board is responsible for that. And so they'll sit, and if there's any questions that we have about any of the ballots, we bring them to the board and they'll rule on it. And when it comes to changing how a ballot, I guess the outcome of a ballot or whatever, the board has to have a unanimous vote on that. So what I mean by that is if a person is inspecting a ballot and they have a question about what the voter's intent was on a particular race, we'll send that to the board for them to review it. And they actually have a set of rules to go by to decide what the voter's intent was there. So for instance, on our ballots, we fill in a circle, the oval. We have to fill it in completely. So maybe the voter drew a line through it, We're not going to have our election judges decide that was a vote. So we're going to send that to the board and let them decide.
Unless there's a line through something else, the other candidate.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
They have to really review that ballot and decide, is it clear that this person meant to vote for that, whatever that slot was,
Right.
So those are the things that we do at the canvas. And we tend to have a fair amount of ballots that get reviewed.
I was going to ask that. And are those all from the mail-ins, or can you have ballots that go through the machine that eventually get reviewed?
Yes, you're correct. That's a great question. A lot of times the inspectors will look at the ballot and say, yeah, that looks good, and they'll send it through. And then it'll go through the scanning unit, but the scanning unit kicks it back for whatever reason, maybe an unreadable mark, or maybe they voted for more than they were supposed to on a race, those kind of things. And in those cases, we'll refer those to the board as well, and they make the final decision on those.
So, okay. So the ballot, I should know this because I vote. When you put that ballot in the machine, does the machine keep the ballot or does it spit it back out?
It does. It keeps it.
Okay. So inside the machine, you have to go find that ballot that it didn't like.
It keeps the ballot as long as it counts the ballot. So if there's an issue with the ballot, it will spit it back out. Okay. So no, we don't have to go in and get it.
And at that point, does the voter have an option to fix whatever the problem is? So.
Yes. And so when the voter is actually standing there, on election day or at early voting, and they've cast their ballot, and then it comes back out, the screen will tell them what the problem is and what they can do. And they actually have a choice. So I'll give an example of an overvote. What we call overvote, if they're voting for president, and they're only allowed to vote for one, and they circle
for
two different ones, then that ballot's going to come back. And it's going to actually give them a message on the screen that says, in the race for president, you voted for two, you're allowed one.
Right.
And it gives them the option. They can say, forget it, I'll cast the ballot. And what will happen is if they do, then everything else on the ballot will count. Every other race that they voted for will count, just not the president.
Okay.
It won't count. Or they can say, I want to fix that. And so they can get that ballot back and get a new ballot and fill it in all over again. And then we'll spoil the old ballot, and put it away. So those are the choices that the voter has. Now, unfortunately, at a canvass, the voter's not there. And so that's why the board is going to make that determination. They'll look at the ballot and they'll say, let's go ahead and cast it, and just the president won't count, those kind of things.
Okay. So it is possible, what I'm hearing is, number one, it's possible that if I have a mistake on my ballot and it's kicked out, then one piece of my ballot may not count, but that doesn't invalidate the entire ballot. It only invalidates one race,
That's
potentially.
Correct. That's correct.
Unless I screwed up every race.
Right.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I will say, I'll speak for this particular board, but I know boards in the past have always erred on the side of casting or counting that person's vote. So they try to figure out, how did this person intend to vote, and did they mean to vote for this particular candidate, and is there a way that we can all come to an agreement together and say, yeah, we do think that they meant to do that. It would have to be pretty clear that they had made a mistake or that they did not intend to do that for them to reject it.
Or that it just is pretty unclear that they of their intention before you'd reject it. Interesting. Yeah. You had mentioned about, in the first segment, you had mentioned about the thought process that one of your responsibilities is to keep the election rolls up to date. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to us about the different formats? Because I'm imagining, you said people pass away, people move in, people move out. I may move from I may move out of the city of Hagerstown into the county, or out of the county into the city. Yeah. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, we have a lot of processes for keeping the rolls up to date. Just aside from getting voter registration applications, in from voters, other ways that we'll do that, we have the Electronic Registration Information Center, we call it ERIC. It is a collaborative between 31 states and the District of Columbia, where if someone moves out of our state into another, we'll get a report on there. So, if somebody moved to Pennsylvania, because, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, we're so close to any of those. It's, people do that all the time.
Right.
And so we get reports every month that say that, such and such voter moved to Pennsylvania. And we'll review that to make sure that the information we're getting is the latest information. Because sometimes in those ERIC reports, we'll get information that may not be the latest information. So for instance, it might say, in August, this person moved to Pennsylvania, but then we got a voter registration application in October, from the same person. So in that case, we wouldn't take them off the rolls because they moved to Pennsylvania. We say, no, they're still here in Washington County, so that kind of a thing. That's what ERIC does for us. And we also have the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene for the state of Maryland every month sends us a report of who has passed away. And so we automatically, once we get names from that, we just automatically cancel them. Other ways that we would cancel is if we get word that someone had passed away, we don't automatically cancel them, but what we do is we'll send a letter to their address. And then hopefully a next of kin or someone will get that letter, and then they can sign it and send it back. And once they've done that, then we'll take them off. Yeah. We're not able to take anyone off or make any changes to their voter registration without authorization, right? So either authorization from that voter themselves or another, for instance, DHMH, that's considered authorization.
Right.
those kind of things. So, so in the case where we've heard of someone passing away, we don't just take them off. We have to have someone sign a document that says, yes, this person has passed away. And then
So
we'll
it
take
has
them
to
off.
be a family member or a competent authority.
Yes, exactly.
Interesting.
And we also we'll get word that someone has moved, but we don't have that confirmation that they moved. So what we'll do is, in that case, we'll send what we call a confirmation card. It's like a postcard size. We'll send that to whatever the latest address we think they're at, and then if they get it, they'll sign it and send it back and confirm it. Or if we don't get anything back, we don't change anything, but we put them in an inactive status. So, and what that does is, if they are still living in the county and they decide to go vote, then we'll gather their information from there. So we'll let them vote, and then we'll say, okay, what's your latest information? Where do you live? So that we can update their information. So being inactive still allows them to vote, but it also kind of flags them so that we can make those changes when we do find them eventually and put them back to active status.
Edge case here, but how do you handle people that those changes happen days or weeks before Election Day?
We do a lot of cleaning up like right before the voter registration deadline, and then right after the voter registration deadline. There comes a time where we can't make any more changes before the election.
So,
because,
so November 3rd, let's say, so November 3rd is the election.
yeah,
I move out of the city on October 31st.
right.
I'm still going to vote in the city, right?
You would be considered active in the city, yes, because our database would have been loaded on the poll book that, that was your last address, and you're an active voter at that precinct. So the interesting thing too about Election Day and our polling place precincts, each poll book at your precinct only has the voters that live in that precinct. Okay, so if someone from another precinct comes there to vote, we're not going to see them right away. Because they're not registered at that precinct. So then we have to start doing a search throughout the state to find them. And if we find them, we can say, oh, your polling place is such and such. If you want to go vote there, you can vote a regular ballot, or you can vote here and you have to vote a provisional ballot, because we got to keep the integrity of the precinct,
So talk about a provisional, finish your thought,
Yeah.
but then talk about a provisional ballot.
So in your case, if you had moved out of the city, let's say you moved to Boonesboro or whatever, you go to Boonesboro to vote, they wouldn't find you, because you're not registered there, you're registered in the city, even though you actually did move there.
Right.
Now we give a certain amount of grace, especially when people move outside of the voter registration deadline, because it's not your fault that we couldn't update the records, and so we do allow for you to be able to vote a regular ballot if, you can show, well, I just moved within a certain amount of time,
Okay.
But to talk about provisionals. So provisional ballots are ways for people to vote, even though we found, I don't want to say a discrepancy, but there was a reason why we couldn't.
They requested a mail-in ballot, but then you never got one.
Yeah, something like that. So it's just a reason why we couldn't give them a regular ballot. So you're right. If someone had requested a mail-in ballot, even if they didn't vote it and send it in, that automatically flags them. And so we can't issue them another regular ballot because we already did that. We already issued them a ballot. They may have decided, I'm going to vote on Election Day, ripped it up and thrown it in the trash. But if they come to the polling place, we're still going to let them vote, but they're going to vote a provisional ballot. And the reason we do that is so that we can then research and make sure that they didn't send that mail-in ballot back. So they vote a provisional ballot, we put that in a bag, we hold it until after Election Day so that we can do some research, and that's why we do provisional ballots. Same thing with the scenario I mentioned. You go to a polling place that's not yours, that's why you vote a provisional ballot, because you could have gone to your polling place where you're registered and voted. And so we have to have you vote a provisional, and then we research it and make sure you didn't vote at your other polling place. So those are all the reasons why we have what we call provisional. Doesn't mean it doesn't count. It just means we have to make sure that that is the only ballot that you've submitted.
We talked about a special case, as I'll call it. I don't know what the official term is for somebody who does not use English as their first language, but there are many special cases. Talk to me about how you make accommodations for individuals with disabilities. Talk to me about how you help people who face challenges in the registration process. Talk to me about how you handle people that are homeless.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that we can do, and I'm talking about, you know, at the polling place. If you want to vote at your polling place or at early voting, we have a number of ways. So if someone is disabled, or if they just feel like they need help marking and casting their ballot, we have what we call a voter assistance form, and they could bring someone with them, and that person can be their assistant. So they have to fill that, you know, information out to show that they're agreeing that they're letting that person help them. They could also have 2 election judges help of opposite parties. You know, we always do it bipartisan. And then we also have adaptive equipment for people with disabilities. Our ballot marking device has assistive technology on it. So if someone is visually impaired, they can put headphones on and they can listen to what's on the ballot, and it can navigate them through, and they can make their selections. There's a keypad that they can use, and it's certified by the National Federation of the Blind. So anyone who had been trained on that kind of a keypad would know how to use it. So there's a lot of ways to help. You know, another thing would be like someone who has a mental disability. We've seen voters like that. So, you know, their family member brings them with them. Being mentally disabled does not mean they can't vote, right? So they'll come and they'll help them, you know, using the voter assistance form. So
Interesting.
Yep.
What about homeless?
We do register homeless folks, but we have to have a physical address for them so that we can place them in the right precinct.
Okay.
And so a lot of times what a lot of the homeless folks will do is they'll use the Reach Center, you know, on Franklin Street
Right.
as an address, and their Reach Center is willing to do that. So we'll have a lot of folks who are registered at that address. So they end up being whatever that precinct is that the Reach Center is. And that's the reason why we need to have a physical address, because I mean, we have to put them in a precinct. So we need to know
Understood.
where they are geographically. Yeah.
Does the election board have any outreach programs or events aimed at reaching people to encourage registration or encourage voting? Do we do that at the local level, or is that all state or national?
We do within Washington County. We will do that. We actually have Sarah Hall as one of our. She's actually our outreach coordinator, and this is actually a new position we've created. This was one of the hats that I kind of had when I was deputy director, and so I kind of passed that on to her. But so now she's really focusing on that, and so we're going to try to do a lot more with that. But what we typically have done in the past is work with community groups. A lot of times, like we go to high schools. Smithsburg High has had us a couple of times where we'll give presentations to students, and we do voter registration drives there. We've gone to HCC a number of times. League of Women Voters works with us a lot. And of course the central committees. We train people on how to be voter registration volunteers. So they help other people register to vote. So we give them training on making sure that the people they're helping register are filling out the application properly. And they actually get certified. So they get a little ID badge from the state that says they're a voter registration volunteer. So those are the kind of things that we do. But yeah, we look forward to doing a lot more in the future. Since Sarah's come on, we went to Elgin Station for the Housing Authority. They had an outing there, and they allowed us to come and help with that. So we're trying to help do that a lot more.
Okay. This next question's a tough one because I know there's a lot still up. Well, maybe not a lot. There's some things still up in the air about early voting and where the sites are going to be. I know there's several different groups or sets of elected officials that have voiced opinions, concerns, whatever you want to call it. What can you tell me about early voting sites? What can you tell me about how many people have taken advantage of those in the past? Go through that process.
Okay. Yeah, early voting started in 2010. We were at the old PNC Bank building on Washington Street, which is now part of the county administration complex. I think we had 800 people came the whole week, our first year doing early voting, because it was brand new and people weren't sure how to take it. But
Right.
it's gained in popularity ever since. In 2020, I think was our biggest year ever. We had 17,722 people voted in 2020 at early voting. So it is gaining in popularity. there's a lot of rules and regulations to how we can select our early voting sites, and they're codified in election law and in Code of Maryland regulations. There are things that each early voting center must absolutely satisfy. For instance, must be accessible. Okay, that's one of, if it's not accessible or can be made accessible.
Now,
we
accessible,
can't
you mean
use it.
handicapped?
Handicapped accessible, right. So we always look for buildings that, like public buildings are typically going to be accessible, because they have, laws they have to follow when they're being built. So, so those are the requirements. And then there's a list of things that we call factors to be considered, okay? And that's where it gets gray, okay? Because factors to be considered doesn't mean we have to meet all of those things. It just means we had to have taken those things into account when we selected an early voting site. And so one of those things is, in fact, I think one of the first things that's mentioned is it has to be within proximity of disadvantaged communities, meaning minority communities, low-income communities, as well as communities that have a history of voter suppression. Okay. Another one is equitable distribution throughout your county. And so sometimes those compete against each other, right? Because the city of Hagerstown, of course, is where our disadvantaged communities, where the majority of our disadvantaged communities are located. And to be honest, it's where the majority of our voters are located. Within a 10-mile circle of Hagerstown, there's 80% of the county's voters.
Really?
Yes. So, so that's where we've always, in the past, always had our early voting centers in the Hagerstown area. In 2010, like I said, it was at the PNC Bank building on Washington Street. In 2012, we were at the Red Cross on Eastern Boulevard. In 2014 and 2016, we were at the Sheriff Department's warehouse, the county warehouse out on Western Maryland Parkway on Tandy Drive. And this was back when we only had one early voting site. Okay, that's all we were required to have was one early voting site. 2018, we were at Hager Hall, and that was very successful. That was like our best early voting we'd ever had. And then they closed. But then in 2020, the county built our new place on Virginia Avenue, and that's where we had our early voting in 2020, right outside of Hagerstown, the corporate limits. So it's always been a centrally located area so that folks in the western part of the county, folks in the southern part of the county, they all have to come to Hagerstown, right, and vote in early voting. And then in 2022, we were required to have two. And so we searched to find our second early voting site. We felt like, well, we already have the place on Virginia Avenue. That covers Hagerstown. Let's go and see if we can find a place out in the county somewhere. But we could not find a single place. Either a place was a satisfactory place to have early voting, but the owners of the place didn't want us to do it, or folks that wanted us, it just didn't meet the requirements. We just could not find another place. And so Kay Rabusi, our director, she had spoken with the Hagerstown Library, and they were willing, they were like, absolutely, would love to do it. And so we went down there and took a look at the place. And even though it had, it's on the third floor, so people got to walk up steps. I mean, there is an elevator.
Right.
So it is accessible, but it took a little more effort than just being on a ground floor. But other than that, I mean, great location, plenty of parking in the back. Some candidates complained about the no electioneering in the front area because the 100-foot was like down Antietam Street, so there was no place that candidates could be. But so anyway, long story short, we selected the Hagerstown Library because it was the only other place we could get. So we had, and people complained about that because here we are in this county that's 70 miles from one end to the other, and we have two early voting sites that are a mile and a half away from each other. So people complained about that, but we did it there because that's all we had. And so then in 2023, as we're getting ready for the 2024 elections, we're still required to have two, but we're very close to the threshold of where we would be required to have three early voting sites. And so we thought it would be a good idea to go ahead and have three, even though we're only required to have two. And so again, we started looking outside the city of Hagerstown so that we could, folks in the western part of the county and folks in the southern part would have a closer place to vote. And we found the Boonesboro American Legion was willing. The Fair Play Fire Hall was willing, so we looked at the Fair Play Fire Hall. Hancock Town Hall was available. And then, of course, the library, again, Hagerstown Library. So we looked at all of those, and we decided that when we did all of the figuring and all of the facts and all the requirements that we have and the things we had to take into consideration, we found that Hancock Town Hall, our place on Virginia Avenue, and the Boonesboro American Legion were the best of the 5. And we did all the combinations, and looked at all the combinations.
Now, you say we, does that include your board?
It does. It includes the board. The board and the staff worked together for months, looking at all of the things that we have to take into consideration. And the board actually, members of the board helped when we actually did physical site surveys. They came out with us and, saw the places. In fact, 2 of our board members came out to Hancock. And there's things that we have to think about. Like, for instance, how many voters in the county are going to be within a certain mile radius of all of these early voting sites? And so when we looked at all of the different combinations, and I think there was, I forget how many, whatever, 3 site combination you can do out of 5 sites. Hancock Election Center on Virginia Avenue and Boonesboro American Legion were the 3 best. They met, the criteria by the best. Now, so that was what the board voted on. And so to have a 3rd early voting site, we had to get approval from the county commissioners and approval from the state board. And so once we approved the 3 sites, then we went to county commissioners. County commissioners unanimously approved Boonesboro as our 3rd site. And then when we went to the state board for that, they had received a lot of complaints about not having it at the library, not having early voting at the library. And so the state board asked me, I was the only one on the call, why it was that we selected the ones we selected. And in the end, they decided not to select the Hancock. They did not approve the Hancock site. And so they've, without telling us to, they implied that we need to select another site. So right now, the sites that are approved are our place on Virginia Avenue and the Boonesboro American Legion. And so it is still up to us to come up with a 2nd early voting site.
Okay, or actually a 3rd, right?
Yeah, I mean, technically, the way the state board approved it was Virginia Avenue was number 1, Boonesboro was number 3. Because that's what the...
okay.
And that's the way we presented it, too.
Okay.
So Hancock was number 2, Boonesboro was number 3. And so it's still 1 and 3. We got to select number 2.
Okay.
So that's kind of where we are.
And you're
right
still
now.
working on that?
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. So, last question.
We're done?
We've chewed up an hour very, very quickly. Okay. Security, integrity of the elections locally and the elections in Maryland. We hear all of these rumors, as you said, that the state calls them. What's your opinion?
Yeah. So security of the election has always been our number 1 concern, even before there was ever rumors of anything occurring. So that's always the first thing that we take into account. One of the things I think that people will see when they come to the polling place or to early voting is that everything is done in a bipartisan way. So no one person has control over anything. We have 2 chief judges at every polling place, including early voting, and they're always bipartisan, always one Democrat or Republican. And they have to, anything that has to be signed off on, they both have to sign off on it. I mentioned earlier that if someone comes and they need assistance voting, we have 2 bipartisan judges helping that person. We don't just have one person helping, right?
I heard.
Yeah,
that was not lost.
Right, and so a lot of concerns have been about our voting equipment. I mentioned earlier, we test every single piece of electronic equipment. We make sure that that thing is working properly, and then we close it, lock it, and seal it, so nobody touches that equipment again. So by the time it gets to the polling place, we know that it's going to work properly. Some people there have been concerns about hacking into electronic equipment. None of our equipment is connected to the internet. Not only is it not connected to the internet, it doesn't even have any equipment inside of it that would even allow someone to ping it, remotely. It's just a, it's just a piece of electronic equipment, So, the ballot marking device, for instance, all it is just an electronic pen. So people can get their paper ballot and they can circle the ovals on the paper ballot, or they can go to the ballot marking device and electronically circle their ovals. They still have to print that ballot off, and they haven't cast their ballot yet until they go to the scanning unit and cast it. And so there's nothing on that ballot marking device except for a memory stick inside that has the election loaded so that the ballot will come up, right? And so the ballot comes up, they mark their ballot, they print that, and when they print that ballot off, that's marked with their selections, it clears everything out on the ballot marking device so that's ready for the next voter to come, okay? So there's no information that's held on the ballot marking device at all. It doesn't know what voter came, doesn't capture any of that information, doesn't capture how they voted. It's all on that paper ballot that gets printed off, and then they send that through the scanning unit. And so in the scanning unit, it doesn't have a modem on it. People have raised concerns about that. So there's just no way for it to be hacked remotely. The only way that anybody could change any results on the scanning unit is if they did it right there physically. And the only way for that to happen is if an election judge took a break for 2 hours and just let somebody come up and do it. So, and which is what we're not going to do. We always have an election judge standing there at the scanning unit from open to close, monitoring the scanning unit, making sure that nothing's going on with it. And we have seals on it, so that in order to get into the door where the equipment is that they could manipulate, there's a seal on it, so they have to break that seal to get to it. So there's just no way for anybody to fool with the election whatsoever. So it's completely secure. I just want our voters to understand. We at the election board take that more seriously than anybody, because our reputation's on the line, if anything's happened. So they can be sure it's a very secure election.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us. This was very informational. We've talked 2 or 3 times now, and every time you appear, I learn something new, several things tonight. So I hope you'll join us again once before the election, to hopefully tell us anything that's going on, and maybe have the final sites ready for early voting at that point.
I sure hope we'll have some information then.
Excellent, excellent. That's all the time we have tonight. We hope you will like us on Facebook. We hope you'll follow us on Twitter. And we hope you'll send us your feedback to feedback@theflipsidetv.com. That's feedback@theflipsidetv.com. Most important, join us again next week for another visit to the Flip Side. Good night.